Hey guys, today I'm doing something. Yeah, I know, it's very shocking. So, I'm going to be starting off the entire year in May by talking about everyone's favorite pastime, drinking alcohol. Or more accurately, lack thereof.
Prohibition doesn't ban the drinking of alcohol.
Okay, I guess I'm being joined by fate today.
And personally, I got the idea of a book review. It's called The Great Gatsby. Ever heard of it?
Oh, yeah, The Great Gatsby. I read that the other day. Why?
It's got some pretty nifty opinions about alcohol.
This feels like an awkward segue. You know what? Screw it. Let's just get into the book. Chapter 1. We're first introduced to our narrator, Nick Carraway, who lives in West Egg, New York during the 1920s, a few years after the Probation Act was signed, basically banning the selling and distributing of alcohol. And not too long after coming to New York, Nick decides to pay a visit to a woman named Daisy Buchanan and her husband, Tom Buchanan. Let's just say he holds some divisive opinions. And for what little's worth of it, there's also Jordan Baker, who's basically just Nick's love interest. She does like one thing later. And outside of introducing characters, there's not really much that chapter 1's good for. In fact, I fell asleep halfway through it. And so we cap off chapter 1 by seeing Nick going back to his home with Gatsby standing in his lawn, reaching out to an ominous green light.
I think he might be high.
It's completely possible. And so we sprout into chapter 2, which is probably one of my favorite chapters because of a certain scene later on. Then we get the Valley of Ashes, which is pretty much just a Fallout 4 town with a weird sign in it. We then come to a car shop, which is owned by a man named Wilson, whose wife is cheating on him with... Hello, Tom Buchanan. We go to a little while later as we see Tom Buchanan's party with everybody getting a little bit tipsy talking about Gatsby. Now, while the party itself isn't exactly stellar, the gossiping about Gatsby does hold some interesting points, such as one being about him being related to a German emperor. Now, in my opinion, the rest of the chapter 2 scenes weren't exactly interesting or notable, except for one, which single-handedly took the cake for me when it came to chapter 2 and everything else before it. It's Myrtle getting slapped in the face. Chapter 3 kicks off with Nick being invited to Gatsby's party, which is notably a lot better than Tom Buchanan's. Honestly, there's a lot that goes into this party. There's drinks, there's men, there's women, and the night sky, and a massive mansion. But on top of it all, there seems to be no need for an invitation to get in. In fact, Nick is probably the only one invited. And while there wasn't any poor people roaming around, there was a noticeable person there to Nick, and that was Jordan Baker. And early on, we actually do see Nick have a meeting with Gatsby, who was there at the party, but he wasn't really drinking. Nick describes him as not really having any flaws, and Gatsby notices Jordan Baker, who he pulls aside to tell her something before Jordan, Nick, and literally everybody else leaves, crossing over to a car accident, which seems to really be going into the depths of alcohol consumption and all that. Heck, even the guy who was driving didn't even notice that his car had stopped until he peered out the window to look. And while the moment was small, it did give us a little bit of insight as to what people did at the time with their alcohol, and of course their achievements and ignorance with doing so. Honestly, I'm glad that they kept this moment really in depth in the...
It's barely mentioned in the movie.
What?
It's just a background event in the movie.
In a 2.5 hour movie. Okay. So I guess we skip over that and head straight into chapter 4 then. Nick gives us a general overview of the people who attended Gatsby's party, and all of them were notably some of the nation's wealthiest people. On their drive back to the main city, Gatsby decides to tell Nick a story from long ago, about a young man named J. Gatsby, born into wealth before inheriting that wealth after his parents died, and that he's from a Midwestern city, San Francisco? I thought about it. San Francisco isn't from the Midwest. Gatsby, are you stupid? Okay then, so Gatsby then goes on to claim that he went to Oxford, collected jewels in Europe, hunted big game, awarded a few World War I medals, and rightfully so, Nick is a little skeptical. Gatsby speeds with Nick through New York, and when pulled over by the police, Gatsby simply pulls out a white card that makes the policeman back off. And if you didn't know, white cards were a sign of corruption back then. They go to meet Mayor Wolfsheim, who is very clearly a red flag if you couldn't tell by the literal teeth he's wearing. And to top it all off, if he wasn't bad enough already, he's a gambler who fixed the 1919 World Series. Isn't he just a wonderful man?
Isn't it a little suspicious that Gatsby knows him?
Yeah, it is. And after that, Nick then goes to see Jordan Baker, who tells him just what Gatsby told her a whole chapter ago. Gatsby wants Nick to host a little party for him and Daisy. Do you see where this is going? You see, Gatsby's plan is to tell Jordan to tell Nick that he wants Daisy to be invited over to Nick's house so Gatsby can then go over to meet Daisy himself. It's a little convoluted, as you can tell. But you see, Daisy is a married woman, and Gatsby probably knows that, and still he has full intent to ruin that if it means he can get with Daisy, which we find out really quickly. So, after a date with his maybe lady, Nick decides to come back on home and sees that Gatsby's lights are all on. It's kind of weird, buddy. And all of a sudden, a wild Jay Gatsby appears, who is supposedly, probably, I theorize he was hiding in a bush waiting for Nick to come home because he just sort of pops out from nowhere. And here we learn that Gatsby's a little bit of a paranoid freak, as he just sort of wants to make sure that Nick is, sure about inviting Daisy over. Not only that, but he even offers Nick a job in someone to do his lawn if he's willing to have her over. I'm assuming what he's offering is bootlegging, but it's never directly said, but Nick declines it anyway. The next day, we're greeted to rain. A nervous Gatsby, who I will admit is pretty funny in the 2013 film here, and a whole garden of flowers that they decided to buy on a shopping spree that Daisy barely acknowledges when she does come along. Not too long after Daisy comes along, Gatsby winds up knocking Nick's clock off, which he apologizes for rather quickly. Where? After that embarrassing scene, we see that Nick is finally embracing his role as the narrator and third wheel of the Great Gatsby, as he decides to try and leave before he gets pulled into the plot for any major reason. Gatsby attempts to follow Nick and says that this was a horrible idea and that he shouldn't have done this before Nick calls him a little boy and leaves. As Nick comes back, we see that the two are finally overjoyed with each other as the rain stops. And Gatsby decides to invite Daisy and Nick along, where they inevitably look at his glorious shirts. Gatsby gets Klipspringer to play the piano, him and Daisy dance, and Nick finally decides to get out of there for good, leading us into Chapter 6. We begin Chapter 6 off by hearing Gatsby's compelling backstory, with the fact that he's a total liar and wasn't always rich, but instead a poor farmer under a man named Dan Cody. And during said backstory, we find out that Jay Gatsby's real name is actually James Gatz. And so, as any good kid would, he'd help out his alcoholic caretaker during his drunken stupors and grow close enough to him for him to leave Gatsby with $25,000.
That's not that much.
Back then, it was around $400,000.
What?
Unfortunately, Cody's mistress kept him from actually getting any of that inheritance. And coming back to modern day, Nick notes that he hasn't seen Gatsby or Daisy around for a while before finding Tom Buchanan at Gatsby's house! Gatsby's there, though. And once again, he's a nervous wreck, and Tom reacts when Gatsby inevitably says,
"I know Daisy."
What?
Tom, being the utterly tactless rot that he is, condemns Gatsby for his lack of social skills and notes Daisy's tendency to visit Gatsby's alone, which just makes him a little suspicious. Tom guesses that Jay's a bootlegger, only for Daisy to say that he just runs drugstores before they inevitably leave the party. Gatsby, being the man-child he is, comes to Nick to tell him that he's afraid that Daisy didn't have a good time. As Gatsby continues to be a suspicious individual who can't actually hide the fact that he's seeing Daisy, he invites Tom and Daisy over to his house, which culminates in a relatively boring but eventful talk where Tom and Daisy discuss the very thing detrimental to their marriage aside from each other. Jay Gatsby.
Gatsby, you can't just recreate the past. That's an...
Oh, but I can. Sportsy.
And so we come into Chapter 7 with Gatsby just having a little too much fun with Daisy, deciding to call off his parties, which were revealed to be a lure for her. And I guess it worked. In the average Arizonian climate, Nick heads out to Tom's place to have lunch with Jordan and Gatsby since they were there as well. The nurse brings in Daisy's kid, which Gatsby practically gawks at in confusion, while Daisy seems to just be showing off her kid like a medal you'd win after a race. Gatsby and Daisy, sharing a singular brain cell, can't hide their love for each other, not even in front of Tom Buchanan. Understandably, he is pissed, but hey, he lets it slide for now. In fact, he decides to just set it aside for a while. So long, in fact, that he's willing to go to New York, take Gatsby's car, have Gatsby take his, go to Wilson's garage for gas, and see that Wilson's aware that he's being cheated on.
As the mystery gang of a group finally settles down at the Plaza Hotel,
Tom finally enacts his little plan to confront Gatsby.
So then, oh sport. I smacked the bottle over his head.
Why do you say that?
What? Sportsy.
Old sport, why do you keep saying that?
Tom, I'm gonna have to ask you to leave if you keep asking these weird questions. Just call up some ice and a mint julep and see if you can clear your head.
You know what? Fine.
The marriage going on under us is quite loud, and in this heat...
They're morons, unlike Mr. Oxford over here.
I went to Oxford.
We know. For how long?
UHHHH 1919 for 5 months.
I know my wife's cheating on me with you.
Tom, have some self-control.
Yay, oh sport. Yay, oh sport. Show some control.
He cheated on my wife, who's going out with Mr. Nobody from nowhere, Oklahoma. Next thing you know, they'll be letting any different racism.
You get the point. It went downhill quick. After Daisy's affair was called out, Gatsby attempts to get Daisy to tell Tom that she never loved him, which it goes about as well as you'd expect since she doesn't actually go through with it all the way.
It's Nick's birthday.
And it's Nick's birthday because people care. On the way back to Long Island, we finally see someone die, and I'll be honest, I was unironically happy about it. Wilson understandably freaks the hell out about his literal, albeit unfaithful wife getting run over. Tom tries to calm Wilson down while also convincing him that Gatsby was the one who was driving. At least, I'd say convincing, but it's what was thought at the time. Upon coming back to Tom's place, Nick's outside, and Gatsby, as I think is a running gag in this book, is hiding near someone else's house for some odd reason, popping out at a really weird time. He tells Nick that he wasn't the actual driver, but instead it was Daisy, and he stays put to make sure that Tom doesn't hurt her. Nick goes inside to see that Gatsby's dreams are basically being stomped out by Daisy and Tom reconciling, and Nick finally buggers off, leading us into Chapter 8. Nick fails to get a good night's sleep as Chapter 8 opens up to him once again going to Gatsby's mansion. We get the rather disturbing knowledge that Gatsby watched Daisy's window until 4 in the morning. Gatsby then gives us a bit more backstory this time in relation to his relationship with Daisy back in the day. Him and Daisy got down to it before the story ends, as a gardener tells Gatsby that he's going to drain the pool, so Gatsby tells him no, he's going to go in there. So Nick goes to work. He feels a little too distracted, so distracted in fact that he refuses to meet Jordan for a date. We then go back to the night that Myrtle died, with her and Wilson were just doing prior to that, having a simple, polite conversation between two.
You can't hide from God. You can't hide from him, not from God. Not from God.
After Wilson educates Myrtle on the godly eyes of the T.J. Eichelberg sign, he looks around for the mysterious driver who he deems to be Gatsby for obvious reasons. Nick goes back to West Egg as a body discovery scene plays, with Nick discovering Wilson and Gatsby's body laying around. And going into Chapter 9, okay, this is going to be hard. I'm just going to be completely honest. I don't know what I can say about this chapter. It's just so uneventful. I can't really make any bad jokes about it or do anything too clever with it. Because, we see Gatsby's funeral attended by a massive pool of 2 to 3 people swarming the mansion with gossip and questions about Gatsby. Tom and Daisy just seem to have disappeared from the face of the earth. Nick tries to go to see if Wolfsheim, Jordan, or even Klipspringer would come, but none of them do. We only see three people go, and these people being Gatsby's father, this guy named Allies, some I don't even know, a few servants, and Nick himself. There's not much who actually go there.
That's depressing.
Well, that's sort of how it goes for people like the one, the only, the Great Gatsby. After Nick gives his 2 cents about the whole thing, we finally wrap up the book with Nick saying,
Sully be done. Boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. Bah, who am I kidding? This won't sell. Ha!
and that was The Great Gatsby. Personally, I thought the book itself was relatively just fine. It's certainly nothing I'd go back to, but then again, I'm not the kind of person to read books 24/7. But even then, I still found some enjoyment from it. Its commentary on the time like Prohibition and the ideas about going back to the past really hit hard, as you can tell. And honestly, you can see what he's trying to say with certain events half the time. Honestly, I really wish the 2013 movie went a little more about the book's messages through, recreations and actual replications of book events, especially that car crash accident from chapter 3. Gatsby's portrayal is probably one of my favorite to date, and his writing is just so fun to me. From his embarrassment in chapter 5 to his cold reactions in 7, you can really see what kind of person he is. Unsocial, rich guy who spent so much time building himself up financially that he's struggling to keep up emotionally. Honestly, I really love it. Although I would, as much as praise as I could sing for the characterization, I just wish I could say the same for the book's pace. Chapter 1 was undeniably a slugfest, as there were a few moments in the long chapters, and there are just times where you get the sudden urge to just go. I think that really hurt my opinion of The Great Gatsby. I mean, aside from having to read it as a class assignment, I actually did find some enjoyment from the book, and especially its characters, but the book's pace is just something I have nothing to write home about. It's slow, and I really, really thought that the introduction would just go a little faster, and if it did, I probably would have enjoyed it fully no matter what. Honestly, I think The Great Gatsby earns its title of The Great Gatsby, since it's actually great. 8 out of 10 stars, but I'd never read again. Fate?
Nick's the biggest third wheel in human history.
Well, I'm Dune, and don't expect another video for a while. See ya.
Baka Mitai, 子供なのね。夢をおっと傷ついて嘘が下手なくせに笑えない笑顔を見せた I love you もろくに言わない口下手でほんまに不器用なのにどうしてさよならは言えてろダメだねダメよダメなのよあんたが好きで好きすぎてどれだけ次を避けても歪めない相手がバカみたい